My son is in a youth group at church. It's called Awana, and every year they have what they call the Awana Grand Prix, which, if you've ever been in Boy Scouts, is exactly the same thing as the Pinewood Derby. You purchase or are given a kit, which is basically just a block of wood with 4 plastic wheels and 4 axles, and the kids get to design their car on that block of wood and, with the help of a parent, cut it out, shape it, do whatever they want to it to make it exactly what they want. Lately, my son's been obsessed with playing a game called Off-Road Outlaws, and so he wanted to make his car look like the car he has on that game, which is a off-road Baja truck, I guess you would call it. The rules state that the car can be no more than 2 3/4 inches wide. The block of wood, when you get it, is only 1 3/4 inches, so that gives us an extra inch to play with. Normally they just account that as being the width over the tires, but we decided we were going to make some Baja style fenders for it, so we made fender flares over each one of the tires to give the truck a little bit wider stance to it, wider look. As you saw before, I took a hole saw that was a little bit bigger diameter than the diameter of the tires and cut a couple holes in a piece of 1/2-inch plywood that we're going to glue to the sides of the block eventually. Those holes are going to be the inside diameter of our wheel wells for the tires. Now, I know you don't really see my son in these videos a lot. That's because we're using a lot of power tools, and he's only 8. And really, this Pinewood Derby Awana Grand Prix competition is mostly about dads flexing on each other and showing off their woodworking skills. Having a scroll saw really helps out in the process of building this car. My son drew the basic shape on the side of it, and you're able to cut out all the different twists and turns a whole lot easier than if you had a handheld jigsaw. Just makes the process a whole lot easier to do. And as you can see by the amount of time going by here, there is quite a bit of cutting to do. There were quite a few rough edges left from the cutting process, so here I'm using a belt sander to smooth up those rough edges. So here I'm tracing the outline of the block of wood onto the 1/2-inch plywood pieces that we're going to be gluing to the sides. At first we thought we were just going to glue the entire sheet to the side and make the body 2 3/4 inches wide altogether. But after looking at it a little bit, we decided that we were just going to turn them into fender flares, and it really gave the truck a whole lot better look. With the 2 pieces glued to each side, the full width, it just made the thing look way too wide. After looking at some pictures of actual trucks, they all have tapers to the top side and the front and the back of the fender flares. So tip the table to 15 degrees here to cut all those angles into the 3 sides of the fenders. I temporarily installed the wheels onto the block of wood to help distance the fenders from them, so I had enough clearance around them that the wheels would roll when everything was finally assembled. You can see at the top of the right fender there where I got a little carried away with my sanding and took a little bit of a chunk out of the top of it. We're going to take care of that in a couple minutes here. Once I got the fenders placed where I want them, comes the long boring process of clamping them up and then letting them dry. And just so you don't think that I'm doing this all on my own, if you listen closely, you can hear cartoons in the background. My son's out in the shop with me, but he's more interested in watching TV than actually working on this at this point. Once again, you can see a couple chunks missing out of the outer laminate layer of plywood on these fender flares. These I took care of by sanding them down on the belt sander eventually, but the ones on the other side needed a little bit more help. Here you see what it looks like after the glue's dried. It's still kind of a rough shape, so it'll require quite a bit of sanding here. For the rough spots that I just couldn't get out by sanding, it's awful handy to have somebody that owns an auto body shop as a friend. So we went down the road to my buddy Junebug's place. He got out his body filler, mixed up a batch, patched up the couple places that I broke out when I was sanding. There's also some rough spots from the scroll saw where I just couldn't get the sander in to finish them out. He smoothed them all over. Made it look a whole lot nicer than what it would have just by sanding alone. And plus I got to stand around and talk to my buddy while we were waiting for this to dry. And as you can see here, my son did help out a little bit, even though I didn't really get him in the full frame of the video, but there he is, holding the mixing pallet for the body filler. Once the body filler dried, he has a whole lot more fancy tools for sanding and smoothing than what I have at home, and a whole lot better supply of sandpaper. So he refined all the little imperfections in it and then shot a couple coats of primer on it. Once it was dry and we got back home, I put on 3 or 4 coats of black spray paint. I was really hoping to get a nice glossy finish on this, so I knew it was going to take a lot of layers of paint. The next step was adding windows to the truck. I masked everything off and then cut out window shapes with a razor blade. And if I had a little bit more time, we only had a week or so from the time we got the kit to the time we had to race, I would have dug my airbrush out and airbrushed some nice windows on it. But with the time we had, I just grabbed a couple cans of spray paint, I sprayed it with a coat of gray and then came back later and just dusted it with another light coat of blue and a coat of white, trying to give it kind of a hazy, glassy sort of look. As you can see from the background of these videos, I've always got about 15 other projects going on at the same time, but this one took precedence over everything else, so I had to make do with what little shop space I had. I've got a couple of these old bar stools hanging around, and they make the perfect little workbench for a small project like this. Here we're taking the masking tape off so you can finally see what the result of my quick little window spray paint job turned out like. And if you're wondering about the electrical tape on my fingers, I got a couple nicks and cuts, and so that was the quickest thing to grab to patch them up. Kind of a real man's first aid kit. Once the paint on the windows were dry, the next step was adding the numbers to the car. My son had number 15, so we had to figure out a way to put that on the car. We decided a nice circle on the hood with the 15 kind of off kilter in the middle of it would look really cool. So we masked the car off again, and I used one of the wheels as a stencil for the circle, cut that out with another razor blade, peeled the masking away from that, and then sprayed it white. Peeling the masking tape away here, you'll see that my circle isn't quite perfect, but it works for what it's supposed to do. The rules say the car can be up to 5 ounces, and you want to try and make it as heavy as possible to get as much help from gravity as you can. So I went to Hobby Lobby. They have quite a selection of accessories for Pinewood Derby cars. I bought a 2-ounce slab weight that I wanted to add to the bottom of the car. Took a Forstner bit and used that to remove a bunch of the material to try and get a level area even with the bottom of the car once the weight was all attached. I took a chisel, chiseled out the rest of the material so that the weight would fit flat on the bottom of the car. Now, I had to take a little chunk off of the weight to have it fit in between the axles. That made it only about a 1.8 ounces, so I wanted to add a little bit more weight. I took another Forstner bit, drilled a hole into the cab area of the car so I could fill that with some number 4 lead shot. I wanted to be able to have some weight that I could remove in case the car was too heavy at weigh-in, so having the shot in there, I could unscrew the slab weight on the bottom, pull a couple shot out, and then screw the weight back in and have the car weigh in right at 5 ounces. Now, the coolest thing about any off-road truck is all the accessories you get to put on it. So we couldn't have a Baja truck without a whole rack of lights on the bumper and over top of the cab. I found that these screw covers from the craft store, they're used to cover up the screw holes in furniture, look just like lights. They worked out perfect. So spray painted them silver and then put a dab of yellow paint on the board and just dip the front of them into the yellow paint. And they look good enough to be headlights for our truck. While we were waiting for the paint to dry on the lights, I trimmed out the decals for his numbers on his truck. I wanted to trim them as close as possible so I didn't have a big line there where the decal was. Try and make it blend in with the paint job as good as I could. Then we mixed up some 2-part epoxy and used that to attach the lights to the top of the cab and then in front of the grill on the bumper of the truck. We also decided that the truck needed a spare tire, and I had bought some aftermarket wheels from Hobby Lobby to put on this, so we had a couple spares laying around. The original wheels that came with it had a bunch of flash. I just decided that would make a good spare tire. So drilled a hole in the back of the truck, used one of the original axles from the kit, and epoxied that in there with the spare tire. Trying to hide how rough my circle masking job came out and to add a little bit more interest to the truck, we decided we'd outline the circle with a yellow stripe, and I think it added a little bit more pop to the truck, made it look kind of cool. Once everything was dry and we were happy with how it looked, I put about 5 coats of clear coat on it to really bring out the shine and make it nice and smooth and glossy.